Welcome to Staying Connected, a podcast where I talk to people about their stories with VEDS, Marfan, Loeys-Dietz, and related vascular and aortic connective tissue conditions. This is your host, Katie, and before we get into the show, I want to remind you that the views, information, and opinions in this podcast are those of the individuals involved, and the information presented does not constitute medical or other professional advice or services. Any opinions that I express in this podcast are my own and not of my employer. Hi. I hope you enjoyed the last episode with Delaney Kensner, sharing her story with vascular Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, or VEDS. This week, we're talking to Dominga Noe, sharing her story with Marfan syndrome. A reminder before we go over to the interview, the VEDS research study by Maya Brown-Zimmerman, titled The Role of Community in Mental Health, a Grief and Trauma-Related Needs Assessment in the Vascular Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome Population, is still open. There is a link in the episode show notes if you'd like to take that survey. The survey is open to people with VEDS and their parents, partners or spouses, and siblings at least 13 years old. Also, if you like this show, you can support it by joining my Patreon. My supporters on Patreon make it possible for me to continue producing this podcast, and you can join and help this show continue to reach people around the world for just a few dollars a month. But whether you support this show through the Patreon or just by sharing it, it all helps. So thank you. Let's get into the show. Hey, Dominga, thank you so much for coming on the show to share your experience with Marfan syndrome. You want to introduce yourself to people who don't know you?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me. My name is Dominga Noe. I am 30, currently residing in Kansas City, Missouri, and living with Marfan syndrome. I also, fun fact, I also work for the Marfan Foundation. I'm the first individual to have Marfan syndrome working on staff full time.
And I'm so glad that you're coming on to share your story because I know you really well. I feel like from working with you at the Marfan Foundation, and I'm just really excited that you're coming on to share more of you with everybody who listens to the show.
I'm really excited to come on. I mean, yes, we know each other pretty well, and it's really great to have these opportunities to talk just as people living with these conditions.
Mm-hmm. So when did you find out that you had Marfan syndrome?
So I found out when I was about 9 years old. My father had an emergency aortic dissection. Well, that's really saying something, isn't it? Most aortic dissections are emergent, so forgive me on that one. But we were getting ready for a family vacation, and we got the call that he was being rushed to the hospital for an aortic dissection. Luckily, right place, right time, right surgeon. He is still with us today. But after he had recovered from his dissection, my parents took my younger sister and I to Stanford Hospital in Palo Alto, and we were both diagnosed with Marfan. My parents knew my father had Marfan before he had his dissection, and they had had my sister and I checked out when we were born to see if we had Marfan, and they were told that we didn't. So we were just living our lives thinking my dad was the only one with Marfan. But the second we walked into the Marfan clinic at Stanford, they immediately told us we both had it just from the look. And then it was confirmed later through genetic testing and other clinical diagnoses. So it was a bit of a wild ride, to say.
Yeah, I'm so glad that your father survived that aortic dissection.
Me too. Yeah. I always say my dad is a 6'8", 300-pound man, and I had never seen him look so small before. He's a very big man with a very big personality, and when the nurses took my sister and I in to say our goodbyes, just in case, before he went into surgery, he looked the smallest I've ever seen in my life. And at the time, my sister was a toddler, so I don't think she remembers this as much, but it was, looking back on it, was really daunting. And then also in preparation for my own surgery down the line, that was all I had to reference to. was his emergency experience. And so it was really frightening initially before I was able to find support for my own surgery.
So when you were 9 years old and your dad had this aortic dissection, and he knew that he had Marfan syndrome, you said. So did you know what that meant before that aortic dissection at 9 years old?
Not at all. I think it was something that my parents were just sort of keeping to themselves, not really explaining it. I always knew my dad was tall and had some difficulty with mobility, but it was one of those things where I now know that he was told when I was younger that he could just go and live his life. He was stable. He'd just go and live life as he saw fit, not really worrying about Marfan, which is, I think, another testament to how far we've come over the years. Because now I don't think doctors who specialize in Marfan, one, there's more doctors who do specialize in Marfan, and two, I don't think any doctor with knowledge of Marfan would make that suggestion, or I would hope not, at least. So it wasn't something I knew about. It wasn't something that I was educated on at all until I was diagnosed myself. And even then, I think my parents were still trying to navigate how to go about telling me and how that was affecting my life. I think initially I hated it because it meant I had to stop gymnastics classes. It meant I had to stop dance classes, because I think, especially at the time and especially in the situation that my parents had gone through with my dad, it being an emergency and it being so scary, the answer at the time was just stop everything and then we'll pick it back up as we know more about the condition. And it's wild as an adult to look back and think, now I know my dad was diagnosed by Dr. Reed Puritz, who is one of the rock stars of the Marfan community. And I look back on that, I go, he was diagnosed by one of the most amazing voices within our community. And he still didn't know how to navigate this condition, because after being treated by Dr. Puritz, he went to other doctors who didn't know how to handle it, and he was treated differently. And so I look and see it myself as very fortunate now with all of the information that I am surrounded by. I have whenever I get the chance, I have a huge shout out for Dr. Liang, because he's the one who looked at my sister and I and said, yeah, they have it immediately. And he's been my doctor ever since. I live nowhere near anywhere he actually practices, but I still go to him whenever I have questions. And I'm very fortunate to have that surrounding me, for sure.
Yeah. Both of the doctors that you mentioned are amazing, but I want to touch on something there that you mentioned, which is this. I think this happens a lot in our community. You go to an expert and you get some information, and then because that expert maybe isn't in your local area, you hear different things from different doctors and then have to decide kind of what to believe. Is that pretty much what happened?
I think so. I really do think so. I think there was also a lot of other, again, these were things I had discovered as I got older and as my father got more comfortable explaining his medical history to me over the years. I think he had dealt with a lot in regards to his joints growing up, and he had knee surgeries and various things like that. And so there was so many different things for him to focus on as he was growing up, that I think he had gone to so many specialists and he had done so many things that it just became one of those. And also my father's father, my grandfather on my father's side, was a professor, and they traveled the world. So I think also from traveling the world, living in Turkey and things like that, they never really had a primary care physician or a primary care cardiologist. So I think once they got the green light to go live their lives, they were like, okay, we're going to go do that. And when he became an adult, same thing. It was always, okay, I'm going to get this checked out, but I'll get it checked out by a cardiologist. And if that cardiologist went, everything looks cool. One of my triggering statements is really, everything looks good. See you in 3 years. And I say this because I had a cardiologist say that to me recently. And immediately I was turned off because that was what the cardiologist my father had seen a year before his dissection had said.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, that means something bad's going to happen in a year. There may not be any logic to it. I have had much better care than my father had. I have had my preventative surgery and all of that. But that term, because what was said to him is very just something that goes, okay, I'm good. I'm going to go find another cardiologist. Thanks. Just because that history behind that saying, it carries so much weight. And I do hear what you're saying. I think going to these different cardiologists in different regions with different levels of care is really difficult for members of our community, whether that be Marfan, VEDS, Loeys-Dietz, what have you, because unfortunately, medicine is not an exact science.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone has a varying opinion or a varying outlook on different scans and how things can look. And you have the clinical numbers of, oh yes, we know this number is, you're in the red and we need to prepare you for surgery. But even still, one bad day with one bad scan and it can be missed. Mm-hmm. And that's not a testament to anybody's level of intelligence or level of care. I think it's just the fact that we're working with our bodies and everyone is different and every diagnosis is different. And everybody living with each diagnosis lives with it very differently.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so going, to that point, everybody being different and living with this differently and coping with it differently and, their bodies being different, right? Like, because we know, like, Marfan syndrome is not, like, one picture. VEDS is not one picture. Loeys-Dietz is not one picture. But at 9 years old, everything stopped.
Yeah.
Dance stopped. Gymnastics stopped. And there's this major, major crisis. Like, how did you move through that? And how did life change as you started figuring out this diagnosis for yourself as a child?
So I think the biggest coping mechanism I had was being a forever nerd in myself. All I heard when they were describing Marfan to me was mutation, which to me meant I'm a mutant. I'm an X-Men. This is awesome. And so I really focused on that. And that may have been just a coping mechanism. I'm not sure. That's something to unpack in therapy, but it was definitely what helped a lot. I thought I had superpowers and I just wanted to figure out what they were. And so that's really how I coped with it a lot. But as I got older and as I started realizing, because kids can be cruel, I did have a situation where people thought that Marfan was contagious. And that got spread around. And that meant that no one wanted to sit with me. No one wanted to sit with me at lunch. And so I escaped into books and comic books and other things. But I also went to a very small private school, which meant that if one person didn't participate in a sport, then no one could participate in the sport. And I am very fortunate to have a very strong, vocal mom who ferociously protected me throughout my elementary school, middle school years, who worked really closely with my cardiologist to say, okay, so she needs to play these sports to just feel quote unquote normal. What do we need to do to make that happen? And so that meant that when I played basketball, I only played 1 minute of game time for the whole game. And I was really there just to be at warm-ups as the tallest person across most middle schools, to be the intimidation factor. I had no talent for basketball, but I was tall and it made people think, oh, they have a ringer on their team. And that meant that I wore a chest protector when playing softball and made sure that I protected my head so I didn't get hit with a fly ball and detach a retina. It meant just taking a lot of precautions. And it meant that I didn't have a lot of playtime, but I was still on the teams. And I still felt a part of a lot of that because I had maybe think the final number was 13 in my graduating 8th grade class.
Whoa.
Yeah. And so it meant a lot to be a part of those things, because otherwise you had nothing to talk about.
Yeah.
And so it was really great to be a part of those things. It was difficult to make the transfer into high school because that was the official, we're not doing any of this sort of stuff. You can't do any of those things. I really disappointed the basketball and volleyball coaches. And when I went to high school, I walked into this orientation for high school, and immediately they zeroed in on me as a 5'10" freshman in high school. And immediately I said, sorry, I have Marfan syndrome. I can't play. And then I distinctly remember the golf coach sort of peeking out from behind the basketball coach being like, but hey, can you play golf? And so I did play varsity golf when I was in high school.
Okay.
I did not play well. I was not great at it. And I learned that I'm also too loud for golf because I like to vocalize when I don't do well in something. So that was not for me. But it was, I think, going back to what we were saying, I'm fast forwarding from how I felt as a 9-year-old to how I felt as a high schooler. I think the overall feeling was just being different. I knew I was different. I knew I was different for a myriad of reasons, but Marfan just added on to it because I'd rather retreat into a fantasy world of books or comic books or things like that, whereas not everybody in my life would do that. And then also certain things that I could do mobility wise I thought that was the normal. People were telling me all of a sudden that it wasn't. And when I got tired in certain situations or when I had pain in certain situations, I just thought that's normal kid pain. Or when I would get bruised and it would swell up really big, even just from a minor bruise on the playground. And everyone's like, oh, gross. And I'm going, this is my body. What do you mean gross?
Yeah.
And I definitely think my coping mechanism, like I said, was thinking I had a superpower and I just needed to figure out what it was. Obviously, as I got into high school, I'm realizing no superpowers, just chronic illness. But even in itself, chronic illness can be a superpower, I feel. So
I think so too. I would argue that everybody has a superpower.
For sure.
And that you definitely have some that we haven't talked about yet.
Not yet.
But yeah, that's a lot to, we could spend a whole episode unpacking, I think, the challenges and the unique experience of knowing about a diagnosis like this as a child, and then how that how that experience evolves through school and how that impacts like making friends and the activities that you do and what activities you go into as an adult and like all the things that you love. And I feel like we could have like a whole episode on just that.
That navigates my whole life ultimately. I look back on that, and without Marfan, I wouldn't have done theater. Without going into theater, I wouldn't have looked for colleges in New York. Without going to school in New York, I wouldn't have ended up living there, and it wouldn't have been my home for such a huge developmental turning point in my life that just shaped who I am today. Really, those almost, I'm rounding up, but almost 10 years pre-pandemic living in New York City truly shaped me. And I can still consider myself a New Yorker. And none of that would have happened. Most of the experiences, the huge life impacting experiences I've had, meeting my partner is included in that. None of those would have happened without Marfan sort of guiding my decisions. And I don't like to necessarily think that it made me who I am, but it's impacted who I am. I can't deny that.
Yeah. So what was it like having family with this?
I first want to say it really goes back to what I said before about every single person with these conditions lives with it very differently. Because even having family members with the condition, with the same condition, with this almost the same genetic markers, we still manifest Marfan very differently. I've had more of the physical issues than my sister, my younger sister. I had my surgery. Obviously, I had it first. We're 8 years apart, so there's that. But I had my surgery when I was a junior in college, and she had hers just after she graduated college, so not too different. But we manifested it very differently, and the recovery time was very different. Mine was a little bit longer than hers, and who's to say that's because of our experience with Marfan or our experience or the timing in regards to when we had the surgeries and the advancements in the surgery. But she has more eye issues than I do. I have more of the joint pain and more of the heart issues. My dad has had more knee issues as he had his surgeries when he was younger and things like that. And then also mentally, we handle it differently. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a testament to my sister was a toddler when she was diagnosed. So she didn't really know a life other than a life with Marfan. I had 9 years of a life that I didn't know Marfan even existed. So mentally, I handle it very differently. My father handled it very differently because he always knew he had it, but the treatment was different as he was growing up. I know I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to exist in a world that I get to meet amazing people and do amazing things. But I also have my own mental health journey that I focus on a lot with Marfan, and we're all so different, but also it's been good to be able to sort of have somebody to turn to. I'm talking about a lot of the downsides, but on the positive side, I have somebody that I can turn to immediately and say, gosh, I'm having a bad Marf day. And they immediately know what I'm talking about. I have that within the Marfan community because I've had the fortune of being able to grow up in the Marfan community. So I've always had a support system, but having the support system, that immediate familial support system, is also a huge asset because I can just turn to my sister and immediately know especially when we're together in person, I can just sort of give a look and she knows, and we sit down and we don't have to explain why. Or she can do, and vice versa. She can do the same with me and we go, okay, we're going to take a break. And it's little things like, oh gosh, my heart's beating funny. And so to the untrained person, the person who doesn't understand our conditions, they can go, what do you need? Do we need to go to a hospital? What's going on? What can we do? Whereas I can just say that to my sister when we're on FaceTime and she goes, oh gosh, you okay? Like, yeah, I think so. It's just weird. And it sounds a little morbid, but it's true. You go into those moments and there's a sense of knowing and sense of understanding that is a huge help when living with these conditions, because it's just, you don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to over articulate what's going on with your body because someone else has already experienced it too. Even though it may be a different experience, there's just a sense of knowing. Mm-hmm. And that's huge.
Yeah, that is a huge thing. And I know that we've had experiences like that between the two of us too, where there's been something and I've called you. I'm like, Dominga, this is happening. And you're like, all right. You want me to just stay on the phone with you? Like, yes.
Oh my
and
goodness.
Vice versa.
And vice versa. Oh gosh, I know exactly what you're talking about. I called you when I had to run away from a neighbor's dog and I was having difficulty catching my breath, and you were a godsend when I was able to just pick up the phone and talk to somebody who understood that no, I don't need an ambulance. No, I don't need to go to the emergency room. I just need someone to stay on the line with me and make sure that I'm okay and get past this. Mm-hmm. Someone who understands it. And so I think that's also a testament to genetic family and chosen family. It's all a huge part of that support system. And while, of course, having that built in, it's definitely helped. Before we knew the Marfan Foundation, before we knew members of the community, it was a huge help to have that support system of, we're all kind of going through this together. We're all going through the diagnosis together. We're all going through that within my family. Mm-hmm. It's still also even better to have people outside of your immediate family, for sure.
What age did you get involved in the community and start meeting people outside of your family with Marfan syndrome?
So I had a conference before this one, but I say my first real conference was when I was getting ready to go into my freshman year of high school. So it was I don't remember exactly what year it was. But actually, if I do the math, that would probably be 2006, 2007. Mm-hmm. That year, we had a conference sponsored by Stanford Hospital in Palo Alto. So it was also my first year in the teen program that the foundation has. And it's really where I started to feel like I was making connections within the community. I met some amazing people that I'm still friends with today. Someone who's also been on your podcast, Peter Donato, is a huge, huge presence in my life and an amazing friend. And the teen program at the time was run by two other people who have also been on your podcast, Ben Weissman and Maya Brown Zimmerman. And they're lifelong friends and confidants. And I consider Ben and Maya mentors because they've been a huge part of my life. And it just sort of feels full circle because Peter and I now run the teen program that meant so much to me growing up. It was a huge turning point being a part of that program. I made amazing friends. I learned so many great life lessons, and I've made friends. I've unfortunately lost some of those friends over the years, which is another unfortunate aspect of our conditions, is that we lose people way too soon. Mm-hmm. But it wouldn't change a thing. I don't think, again, this is another aspect of this condition that has shaped who I am. That teen program, knowing I have something to look forward to every summer, to go to conference and see my people, see the people that understand me and support me. And we spend a crazy whirlwind 3-day weekend in some random city around the country that happens to have a great cardiac hospital with a Marfan clinic. Doing that was a highlight of my childhood, a highlight of my teen years. And from there, I did fundraisers, I did awareness projects, I helped my mom. My mom was and still is the president of the Northern California chapter of the Marfan Foundation. And so we had events in Northern California that were really helpful to the community. And I wanted to do as much as I could to raise awareness, whether that be at my high school or at local fire stations for first responder training and things like that. So I really got involved when my connections started growing, and that just kept going. And when I moved to New York, I was in the thick of it all, where the main office is. So I was able to volunteer for more events on the East Coast, and I volunteered for the annual New York City Gala. And then another right place, right time scenario. I was looking for a job. The foundation had an opening, and I applied, and here I am.
Now it's full circle.
Full circle. Nearly 8. It's wild to think I'm going to be coming up on 8 years officially as a staff member of the foundation. But most importantly, in my time working with the foundation, I've had the absolute honor of being able to step into my mentor's shoes alongside Peter, and we run the teen program. And it's an insane full circle moment that I just sort of sit in awe of sometimes, because I never would have really thought that this would be something that I would do, but it also makes sense at the same time because, like I said, it's an honor to be able to give back to the program that gave so much to me.
Yeah. I remember sitting with you in the gender breakout session at conference this year, and just like, it was such an incredible moment. And this was like part of the teen program. Mm-hmm. Like this gender breakout session was part of the teen program. And I just remember looking around at this like room full of teens that had Marfan, Loeys-Dietz, VEDS, similar conditions. And the connection there was beautiful. And the things that you talked about, like those were beautiful. And the whole thing was just like, so like, I remember looking at you and I wanted to start tearing up. And I'm like, I'm not going to cry right now. I'm not going to cry right now. But you have done an incredible job with that. You know, you have done an amazing job with that. And it's so good to know like that program gave that to you when you were a teen.
Yes.
And that now you're giving that to those teens too.
And the instance you're talking about, the gender breakouts, I know I mentioned I've been with the foundation going on 8 years now. That moment, 2 hours we spent in a room in a hotel in Chicago, that has to be one of my best, most fulfilling, favorite moments of my time as an employee of the foundation. It meant the absolute world to me. Just being able to see not only how comfortable these teens were to be able to open up. I was very proud to be able to have created a space where they felt comfortable enough to open up about hardships, happiness, sadness, all of these amazing things in their lives. Not only was I proud of that, but I was also proud to see how far this community has come over the years. The things that I spoke about with other teens when I was a teen in the gender breakouts, those aren't things that they worry about now.
Yeah.
Some of them, yes, of course. Some things never change, but there are some aspects of living with these conditions that these teens don't have to worry about anymore. And that is an amazing thing to think that in such, I would like to say, a short amount of time, because I would like to think it hasn't been too long since I was a teenager, but in that time, so much has grown, so much has changed, and there's more support, there's a higher level of care, and there's a higher level of understanding of these conditions, where they are now able to focus less on the longevity of their life. Of course, that's an underlying factor, but they focus more on not just the longevity of their life, but making their life good in that time, making it good for their soul, not just physically, but mentally. And that's so amazing to see. And I'm tearing up just thinking about it. I'm feeling like I'm seeming a little dramatic as I speak to it, but it's not. It's an incredible feeling.
No, it's not dramatic. It was amazing.
It was sort of an out of body experience as we're sitting there in that room. And that was the same way the whole weekend. I mean, our first in-person experience, Peter and I, our first in-person experience running the teen program together was in Newport Beach. And that was an amazing experience in itself, because we took on the amazing feat of taking
Disney
hundreds of children, teens, and chaperones with varying disabilities to Disneyland. And now I jokingly say this has taken 5 years off my life, but I would not have changed a single thing, because the second we walked into that park, and the second you just saw the look on all their faces, all of the planning in the world, all of the back and forth, trying to figure things out, buses and accessible buses, making sure that we had disability services available at Disneyland, all of that stress was worth it the second you saw it on their faces. And so that was an amazing experience. And that was a very different experience than what it was when we were in Chicago. The moments in Newport were just looking at a group of teens all in wheelchairs and not feeling ashamed and not feeling embarrassed for needing a mobility aid in a theme park. That was a huge win. I look back on that, and that was an amazing moment, being able to know that they felt confident enough to ask for help when they needed it. And it wasn't something that they were trying to hide, feeling okay. They were able to just enjoy their time in the parks and not have to worry about being in pain. So that was a huge thing. And then you fast forward, and then being in that room with those teens, just talking about everything and anything, just it was, again, I'm a little speechless now when I think about it, but it was one of the most fulfilling moments of my time with this foundation. And I can think of others, but that one beats every single one.
It was an amazing moment, and really, like, thank you for everything that you do with the teen program. I don't want to sound cheesy, but it's my favorite part of my job. It's the best part of my job. It's the best part of my job. It's my favorite part of my job. And it's the one that I will keep doing as long as they let me, because it's just amazing to be able not only to give back, but to just see it, to just participate in it. I don't even really feel like I have to do much. This generation is so strong. I know that I don't want to say that I don't want to make it seem like I'm invalidating what they do, because of course we know they're strong. They're living with these conditions every single day, but they're so emotionally regulated. They can articulate their feelings, and they're empathetic. They support each other. And it's amazing to see. It's amazing to be a part of. I can just sit in a corner. I don't even have to say anything a lot of the time. They're just so good. And that's not to say that they don't have their struggles or their strife, but they work on it together. Yeah. And it's incredible to see. I mean, that's like the most beautiful part, is just the amount that they work together and talk together and everything. So bringing that community piece back to your experience with Marfan syndrome and the physical manifestations of Marfan syndrome that you've had, like the aortic surgery that you mentioned.
Right.
Like, were you really involved in the community at the time that you had your aortic surgery? And what was that experience like with your surgery?
Yeah, so I was obviously not as involved as I am now. It's my job, so nothing can beat that. But I was pretty involved in the community aspect of the organization. I was going to conference every year. I was volunteering for events that I could. I was living in New York, so I was still volunteering for a lot of events. But I was told that I needed to have surgery during winter break of my junior year of college. And I distinctly remember I have to have this appointment before I go back to school for the next semester. And I was told I had to make the decision of whether I was going to have the surgery that following summer, the summer between my junior and senior year, or if I wanted to wait until I graduated. And like many of us, I knew that having surgery was a when, not an if situation. I had been preparing for that my whole life. But also, like many of us, I think the second you hear it's happening, as opposed to it will happen, something switches. And it suddenly became very real. Mm-hmm. And this thing that I had been living with, that I had been seeing my father live with, my sister live with, it just became very real. And my mind shifted. And I remember going, okay, got it. We're ready. Let's do this. And making the decision. I didn't want to go straight from a graduation gown to a hospital gown. So I made the decision that I was going to do it between my junior and senior year. One, because I wanted to get it out of the way, but I also wanted to have something that was sort of my, you need to focus on your PT. You need to focus on your recovery so you can get back to school. Mm-hmm. So I had something to look forward to post-op. I think that definitely helped me in that. But I do remember leading up to that, I think I put myself into a position where I pushed a lot of the emotion down because it was like, we have to do this. We have to do this. So we're going to do this. And I look back on those times and I think hindsight's 20/20, but I really feel I had a lot of moments where as I got closer and closer, I started having panic attacks. I started having moments where I was just like, okay, this is really happening. And I think that stemmed from while living with this community was so helpful for most of my life, I did feel that I wasn't disabled enough, if that makes sense. I felt like I manifested Marfan in a very different way than a lot of people that I knew. I didn't have it as bad, right? I wasn't dealing with a lot of things that a lot of my friends were. And so I felt as though I needed to be there for them because I didn't have Marfan as bad. And so when it finally got to the point where I was having surgery, I didn't talk about it with the community as much. Because I felt like it was something that I had to handle on my own or just with my family. And again, speaking to the fact that even though I had an amazing library of resources to reach out to people within this community to ask about what they've gone through, how they handled surgery, all I really had going on in my head was my dad's surgery, which was one of the scariest points of my life. And so that's what I think I had in the back of my head, was just looking at that experience and going, okay, I know this is different. There's the side of my brain that knew this is different. This is planned. This is, I have amazing care. I have an amazing surgeon. I have an amazing cardiologist, an amazing team. Everything is looking great for this. But there's still that nagging feeling in the back of my head of what happened to my dad and what could happen. And because I didn't allow myself to lean on the community that meant so much to me, because I felt like I didn't deserve it, because I live with this condition so differently from members of our community, I had people tell me, "Oh, well, you're a pretty Marf, so you so you don't have to deal with this as much," because I don't physically look disabled, or I don't have the quote unquote classic Marfanoid look. And I had been told that for so much of my life, and I had seen other people living with these conditions and thinking, I don't have it as bad, so I should be thankful. So I kept my experience within myself, and it really wasn't until post-op, until I had already made it through, that I really allowed people to support me. And I don't have many regrets in my life, but I do think that may be one of them, that I didn't lean on the community that meant so much to me in such an integral part of my life.
Yeah.
Because I let a societal expectation of disability fuel my feelings. That's a big one.
That's a big thing. Yeah, that is a big thing. And that's like, so it brings in so many aspects of just living with a disability.
Yeah.
That we hear this over and over again in our communities, right? We are afraid to use the handicap decal on the car. If I'm using a wheelchair, I'm afraid to be seen without it one time, or vice versa, right? And this, what's really striking to me in this is this, like, and I've heard it in other members of the community too, this little bit of imposter syndrome almost, like, I don't belong here. Like, I don't have it as bad as so-and-so, therefore my experience is somewhat invalidated.
Absolutely.
And I'm sorry that you went through that.
I don't really admit that a lot. I mean, I feel like, yes, this is on a podcast, but I feel because I'm talking to you, I'm more willing to discuss it. And I think it's something that I don't discuss, not only as a member of this community, but as an employee. Because there is a role in which I need to play to support our community a lot. I think that's an obstacle I may run into in trying to navigate being a patient, a member of the community, and an employee. And that's not to say that that's something that's fueled by the foundation. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that that's something that's fueled by systemic outlooks that our society has on disability. That's not something reserved for any one particular group. That's a humanity thing.
It is.
So, but to your point, yes, it's something that a lot of members in our community go through. And I think the more we talk about it, the more that we vocalize it, I think that is what's going to really change things going on in our community and going forward. And that's another reason why I look at the teens, and I think that's ultimately why I've allowed myself to really go into these thoughts and allow myself to vocalize these thoughts, because I see this younger generation going through the same processes, and I don't want that for them. No. So, like you're saying, my most recent example was when I travel with a cane, because I know it genuinely helps me, especially because travel can be really bad on my body. And I also utilize the wheelchair access in airports, especially when I have like a layover in Atlanta and I know that I can't run from my gate in Terminal C to my gate in Terminal G. I can't.
It's terrible for that.
That's the absolute worst. So I know I utilize the wheelchair access because I know that I allow myself to accept that help. But my partner actually pointed out to me, he'll see me as we're going through security and I'm utilizing the wheelchair, and he'll see me sort of limp a little extra as I'm going through security, because I don't want people to think, oh, she's using this wheelchair, but she doesn't really need it. So he'll be like, are you okay? And go, yeah, I am okay. And he goes, you were limping a little hard. And I was like, yeah, I know. And he goes, and he just has this knowing look on his face because he knows I'm doing it not for my benefit, but for everyone else, because I don't want to feel like I'm taking advantage of a system. And it's so stupid. I'm going to say it. It's so stupid that we feel this need to look disabled enough in other people's eyes. I know when I was in a cast with my ankle and someone got mad at my partner for parking in a handicapped parking space so I could go into the grocery store, because before they could see the cast, they looked at us and they say, you don't need this spot. And even without the cast on my leg, I do need that spot. We don't have a placard because there's a point to, again, going to what you're saying. We don't want to get the handicap placard on the car because that's whether that's an admission or I feel that I don't need it as much as someone else might. So there's those feelings, but there's so many people out there that look at us, that look at anybody with a disability with this lens of, you're not disabled enough.
Right.
And I hate it. I'm going to say it. I hate it.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's like, it's kind of like societally fueled imposter syndrome. For disability. Like, you know that you're disabled, or that you have a disability. I would say, you know, you have a disability, that you need that to help you, whether it's the wheelchair, the cane, the parking spot, whatever it may be. You know that you need X to help you for equitable access. And you're like forced to live with this concern that somebody else isn't going to believe you.
Yes.
That you need it. And worse, that they're going to call you out on it in public and make it into a really, really big deal when all you want is to go to the grocery store.
Right. And I never understood how much of a fear that was for me to be called out for not being. And I'll say it, I am disabled. I have a disability. I'm disabled. Either way you slice it. It's a huge fear to be called out for not being disabled. And just, you're so young. You're fine. Why are you doing that? And going back to what I was saying, because that's such a fear, and working with the teams, I think that's what fuels everything I do with them a lot of the time, because I don't want them to feel those things. I want them to understand. Yeah. And they ask those questions too. They say, so when should I ask for a wheelchair if I need it? Mm-hmm. And I say, when you need it. And it's so much easier to tell them, because you want the best for them, and you want, but I look at myself and I have to remind myself, and I have to remind them that it's not easy. I still have my moments where I'm afraid to ask for extra help. But what it boils down to is this going to make it so you're not in pain for the rest of the day, for the rest of the week even? Is this going to help you enjoy your time? And I think that was something I really noticed in our trip to Disneyland, is we had kids who we got as many wheelchairs as we could, because we knew there's so many kids and they have ankle braces. They don't have ankle braces. They have back braces. They don't have back braces, but they have these conditions. And I remember distinctly saying, do you need a wheelchair? They said, no, thank you. And then later in the day, they would sheepishly come up and say, can I get a wheelchair? And I say, absolutely, you can get a wheelchair. Mm. But what I would love to eliminate in the future is the feeling that they don't need to have it at the beginning of the day if they want it. If they don't want it in the beginning of the day because they're like, I'm fine, I want to move around without needing the wheelchair, absolutely. But one, I would love to eliminate the sheepish need, the feel, or the need to feel that you have to ask for it apologetically.
With shame.
I would love to eliminate that. And I would love to eliminate the feeling of, no, I need to push through my pain, or I need to push myself to the point of being in a position where I need to be in pain in order to ask for the wheelchair. Mm-hmm. I would love to eliminate both of those. And in order to do that, I feel part of my job is to lead by example, is to allow myself to ask for help, to allow myself to use my mobility aids. Even at this last conference in Chicago, I was pushing myself, and I realized I was like, nope, I'm not going to wear my heels today. I'm going to wear my sneakers because that's more comfortable. I'm going to use my cane today because that's what's comfortable. Mm-hmm. I'm going to sit on the floor because that's more comfortable than sitting in a chair. And society or normal societal roles may dictate that I probably shouldn't do that, but I have to do what feels good for me. Mm-hmm. And those moments are what's going to fuel the next generation. And I think whether you need it or not, it's articulating those feelings and having those conversations and letting them know it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to ask for a mobility aid. It's okay to one day need a mobility aid and one day not. There's no one way that these conditions look. There's no one way that these conditions should be. It's all relative. It's all person to person. And if you need help one day, but maybe not another, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
And that's really where I'm not perfect. I will never claim to be perfect. I'm still working on a lot of these things myself. I know that the term ableism is really scary, but I'm dealing with my own internalized ableism. Mm-hmm. And I'll say that loud and proud. I deal with that on a daily basis because I have this expectation of how I should be to make other people feel comfortable. And I'm not perfect, but I don't want to live that way anymore. I want to live in a way that makes me feel comfortable and let that be the priority. I'm not going to let my disability or my condition dictate how other people see me.
Yeah. I think the teens are so lucky to have you in that program.
Thank you.
Is this advice that you would also that you would say applies broadly to anybody with this condition?
Absolutely. I don't think it's just something that happens with teens. I deal with this. I have conversations with many people in our community of many ages. Obviously my main focus is our teens because that is the program that I run, but I love having conversations with other members of our community where we all feel this way. Not all. I don't want to speak for everyone, and I don't want to act like we're a monolith. We're not. But we don't all think the same way, because if we did, it would be very different. It would be a very different world, wouldn't it?
Yes.
But I've had many conversations with people in our community where they go, yeah, I'm just so tired. And I really just want to do this. And I have to go, why don't you?
Do that.
Why don't you? Let's sit on the floor. Let's lay on the floor. Granted, if the hotel comes over and gets mad at you because you're blocking the walkway in the hotel bar, then maybe move. But yes, I mean, yeah, I see it. It's not a specific generation that deals with this. We all deal with it. Mm-hmm. And I want that advice for all of us. I of course want the next generation to not have to deal with it, but I don't want us to have to deal with it either.
Yeah.
I want us to be able to just vocalize when we need help and not feel shame. I don't want to have to feel a need to limp a little extra for other people's benefit, to make them feel, oh, well, yeah, she's disabled, so I guess we can just ignore what's going on.
Oh,
I hate it. I don't want it. I want all of us to feel more comfortable and just being who we are and needing what we need and
being okay with that.
And be okay with it. Exactly. I think it's not any one generation that can learn from that lesson. I think we all can.
Absolutely.
Whether you're able-bodied or not as well. It's a lesson that we all can learn and should learn.
Some of these topics that we have touched on, like, deserve their own episodes,
Yes.
and maybe that's something that I explore in the future, is doing these specials like this.
Absolutely.
But to wrap it up, for medical professionals who are listening to this podcast and listening to your experience about Marfan syndrome, living with Marfan syndrome and being part of the community and everything that has come with it, your surgery experience, all of it, what do you want medical professionals to know?
Oh, that's a great question. First and foremost, I think I want medical professionals to know that you're never going to have the same answer from any one individual. I think you can have all the training in the world. You can have all of the understanding of a condition from a clinical aspect. But until you work with multiple members of our community, you'll never understand the humanity behind it until you get to know the person. And everybody is different. There can be similarities. There can be a lot of similar things when it comes to how they need care, but there's no formula. I think that's the best way to shorten it. There's no formula for Marfan. There's no formula for VEDS. There's no formula for LDS. Everybody is going to be a little bit different. And quality of care is impacted by that, by understanding that. That's what I hope they would learn, and I would love for them to know. Yeah,
that is really, I hope that they take away that. I think that's like it's such an important aspect of caring for individuals with these conditions, is just remembering that individual aspect.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on to the show and sharing your experience.
Thank you for having me. I don't want to pressure you, but if you do happen to decide that you want to talk more about those other topics, I am all in, because just sitting here talking with you, I realized I was kind of zoning out in my zoning out in the best way of feeling the emotion of the topics we were discussing and not having to really overthink my answers. It just came out naturally, and I would really love to just continue to talk with you. One, because you're an amazing human being, but also because we really get into the meat and potatoes of some of these topics.
I love that. Into the meat. That could be like the special series, Into the Meat, on imposter syndrome with disabilities. Into the Meat on, I think, gosh, I mean, I have I have a high suspicion that I'll be doing specials about these topics and that I will be looping you back in for them. I love talking to you too, and I can't wait to talk to you again, whether it's for this or just for our normal day-to-day lives. You're just a great person in my life, and I appreciate you so much. Thanks,
I appreciate
Dominga.
you too. You have no idea. I think you joining the team at the foundation was a huge thing for me. And I really am just really happy to have you as a part of my life. So thank you.
I love you.
I love you too. We should just keep going into a whole other episode of just our love for each other. That's okay.
All right. I'll talk to you soon, Dominga.
Talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Staying Connected, featuring Dominga Noe sharing her experience with Marfan syndrome. If you're ready to get involved or meet others in the community, check out the episode show notes for links to online support groups. You can also join the Marfan Foundation and its divisions, the VEDS Movement and the Loeys-Dietz Syndrome Foundation, in a number of events coming up soon. The Pittsburgh Regional Symposium on Marfan, VEDS, and LDS is today, October 28th, and the Los Angeles Regional Symposium is November 4th. There's also a Walk for Victory coming up in Nashville, Tennessee on November 4th, and walks in many other cities with dates coming up after the holidays. A link to these events are in the episode show notes. Next week, we'll talk to Brent Toonstra, sharing his experience with VEDS, or Vascular Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome. That's it for today. If you like this show, I hope you will consider sharing it with your friends on social media to help raise awareness of these conditions. You can also support the production of this podcast by joining my Patreon. Thanks so much, and I'll see you soon.